So welcome everybody, my name is Stefano Feltri, I'm a journalist and I work with the Institute for European Policy Making here at Bocconi. As you are, can you hear me? The mic is okay? Okay, the IEP, as we call it, the Institute for European Policy Making, is a think tank created here at Bocconi a couple of years ago, focus on, as the name suggests, on European policy making. The honorary president is Mario Monti, the president is Catherine de Vries, and the director is here with us, is Daniel Gross. And we have been hosting this geopolitical debate in the last few months because, as you probably have noticed, this year there are many relevant elections, and it became extremely important to have a geopolitical perspective on current affairs. Since we are here in Bocconi, we tend to look at everything through the lenses of economics and finance and so on. But we need also the geopolitical perspective. That's why we started this series. Today, we are discussing probably the most important, the most consequential event of the last few months, the US presidential elections, and the return or the coming back of Donald Trump. So the format of this event is quite packed. So we have 1 hour, we have multiple guests. So the idea is to skip all the introductory part. We know what we are talking about, and just to focus on thought-provoking analysis. So let me introduce our guests. Here with me in person there is Franco Bruni, who is a emeritus professor here at Bocconi, a fellow of the IEP, and now is the president of ISPI, the most respected Italian think tank on geopolitics. And then we have Gianluca Passarelli, who is a political scientist. He is a full professor at La Sapienza in Rome. And he's the author of a book with the title, which is very relevant for tonight's conversation, on Stati Uniti d'Europa, published by Egea. So he's supposed to play the role of the optimist. We will see if it's still the case. Then we have Maja Rouge, who is with us from... okay, she's here. Okay, perfect. She's a senior policy fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. And the European Council on Foreign Relations is a partner of IEP in another series of events. And what is interesting is that they have just opened a US program with people based in the US, because you cannot discuss Europe nowadays without discussing what is going on in the US and transatlantic relations. Then we have Graziella Romeo. She's associate professor here at Bocconi, and she teaches comparative public law. And she's a law expert, and she will help us to discuss some very important issues like the role of the Supreme Court in the US and the power of the president. And then we have Thomas Schonbaum. He's the Harold S. Shelfman Professor of Law at the University of Washington in Seattle. And he's also a research professor of law at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. He's a trade expert. And a few months ago, he participated in an event here with us, where basically he discussed that either with Biden or with Trump, the title of his speech was "Pick Your Poison." I mean, they were both expected to be protectionists and to introduce distortion in international trade. Then Kamala Harris arrived, but she's not in the picture anymore. So he will help us to discuss what we are looking for with Donald Trump and trade policies. So let me start with Maja Rouge. I would ask her to give us the bigger picture of how transatlantic relations are changing now after that Donald Trump is the president-elect. How do you see it from your perspective? The ECFR published a couple of very scaring policy briefs. One was saying that the template for US in the second term of Donald Trump will be Orban's Hungary. And another one just came out saying that we risk a war in Europe, especially in the Balkans, because Donald Trump will support Serbia, and Serbia's template is the Russia approach to Ukraine, which is creating the Serbian world, which means that they want to destroy Bosnia-Herzegovina and absorb Kosovo. So that's the picture that they are painting. So Maya, it's how much we must be pessimist.
Thank you so much. Since I only have, oh my God, there's a big echo. Since I only have very short time, I will actually focus on some of the key findings from our work on the Republican Party. When we opened the office in DC and started this program, we looked at the foreign policy revolution that Trump has actually brought into the Republican Party in 2016. And if you look at the election of 2024, what is striking is not only that Trump won every single swing state, but that he is on track to get Republicans a win of popular vote in a presidential election for the first time in 20 years. And so we need to ask ourselves, how are these voter preferences changing, and how is Trump kind of adjusting Republican Party in that, and how that relates to foreign policy. We've all read explanations for Trump's win and on policy issues like economy and immigration, but I just want to underline the importance of the ideological dimension, because it will color Trump's approach to both foreign policy and how he sees allies and alliances. And the kind of ideological dimension that we're building on to develop our work is really how he capitalized on the backlash against the Bush-era elites and policies, as well as liberal elites. And that backlash was really visible by non-college educated working class voters. So Trump offered a completely opposite version of foreign policy from your traditional Republican foreign policy. And that was kind of visible in three pledges. First was the promise of deglobalization, so no more liberal free trade stuff, national economic pivot, bringing back manufacturing to America, and kind of trade protectionism. Second was retrenchment, his promise of ending the wars in the Middle East, forever wars in Afghanistan in 2016, and now his promise to withdraw support to Ukraine and end the war in Ukraine in 2024. And the third is this overwhelming backlash in the society against wokeism, and especially among the conservative voters. And so against kind of the liberal woke America, whether it is in education or gender issues, especially transgender. And kind of the extension of this culture wars will really have implications on who Trump sees as his natural allies in Europe. There's more kind of affinity in the Republican Party towards your kind of conservative Christian strongman in the mold of Viktor Orban than for the liberal elites in Berlin or Stockholm or Brussels. And so now that we have Trump, and he will be coming into the White House in January 2025, what can we expect from him in terms of foreign policy? So, when we think of Trump, the Europeans are now in shock and kind of thinking, is he going to implement his pledges to take the US out of NATO, or to withdraw troops from Europe, to suspend the aid to Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera? And how we look at this is that if we start from the premise that personnel is policy, then we need to understand the foreign policy orientation of people around him in his cabinet to kind of think of direction of the foreign policy that his administration will be thinking. And we have developed three kind of foreign policy camps or tribes in the Republican Party. First, the restrainers, who want the US to focus on domestic issues, domestic problems, and retrench from any sort of overseas commitments. Prioritizers, who want the US to fully focus on Indo-Pacific and specifically on kind of deterring Chinese invasion of Taiwan. And one of the most notable personalities in Trump's cabinet who is in between these two camps, restrainers and prioritizers, is his vice presidential pick, J.D. Vance. And then third group is primacists. These are your traditional Republican elites that want the US to retain global leadership, global presence, and who think that US can focus at several issues and several theaters at the same time, be it Europe, be it Middle East, be it Asia. Now, obviously, you can see from these descriptions that whichever tribe manages to get Trump's mind on foreign policy, Trump's ear, will determine the direction of travel. And most notably, on the question of America's support to European security and how they view alliances. And so this will translate into how Trump treats US support for Ukraine. If we have someone like Mike Pompeo, who is now basically, whose name is floated as a potential next Secretary of Defense, determining, how Trump's negotiation with Putin over Ukraine will look like, he wants to negotiate from the position of strength for Ukraine and strengthen the kind of security guarantees from NATO. Whereas if you have that policy driven by J.D. Vance, who is a prioritizer, it will look entirely differently. He wants Ukraine to retain neutrality. He does not want any sort of extension of invitation to NATO. And they are keen to make quicker concessions to Russia, whether it's on territory or whether it's on sanctions relief. Same goes for the US role in NATO and NATO's role in the world. Primacists like Mike Pompeo wanted the US to retain leadership in NATO, but they want fairer burden sharing. They want Europeans to step up on military spending, whereas restrainers and prioritizers, in fact, want to shift burden completely in NATO's to Europeans to, have Europeans backfill for all of the kind of conventional military capabilities that are currently by 80% provided by the US and non-EU NATO allies. And they want to be able to kind of shift their focus fully to Asia, to Indo-Pacific, whereas Europeans should lead in NATO and sort of have their back in Europe. And I think these are the kind of two key issues on security where we will probably know the direction of travel as we hear what are the appointments in Trump's cabinet and who will be in charge of foreign policy. The issues where there's actually an agreement between all three tribes and where we can expect some sort of continuity from Biden and Trump's first term, no matter who is around Trump, is obviously on trade. Trump has pledged and promised, and we believe that he will go ahead with that, to implement a 10 to 20% universal baseline tariff on all foreign imports. That obviously pertains to EU as well. He has pledged to impose 60% tariffs on all goods from China. And we believe that, they're serious about this. And he has basically, at least all of the Republicans in Congress, and now they control the Senate, and around in his cabinet, will want US to continue prevailing in this rivalry with China, whether it means kind of through tech policy and strategic industrial policy, or in sort of asserting military dominance in the Indo-Pacific. Final point on Western Balkans, I think we've obviously made the kind of Trump second administration a bit more dramatic in our papers than it might be in reality. Obviously, but the risk in the Balkans is indeed that the US will take more lenient approach to deterring sort of these efforts to deconstruct the Bosnian state. We have seen the leader in Republika Srpska, Milorad Dodik, who has threatened secession from Bosnia many times, now celebrating Trump's win with Trump's MAGA heads. He's expecting a completely different policy from the Trump administration, so that sort of deterrent would be gone. And I think I'll finish here just to kind of the last word on urbanization bit. the extension of this culture war at home really means that the preferences for allies in Europe will be driven by this very kind of conservative agenda, which they share with Viktor Orban, and Viktor Orban has, already basically announced that he will be, in a way, Trump's envoy in Europe for all different sort of issues. Today, we have a meeting of the European political community in Budapest, where Hungary has presented their peace plan for Ukraine. And we will see probably more of that on the agenda of the European Council in Budapest taking place tomorrow.
Thank you, Maida. It was very, very helpful to have this framework to read what is going to happen in the next few weeks and months. I would move to Graziella Romeo to discuss the other half of this equation, which is what kind of president Donald Trump will be in terms of superpower. I mean, as our Italian friends in the audience probably remember, a few years ago, Matteo Salvini dissolved the government because he wanted to have pieni poteri, which means full power to do whatever he wanted. It didn't end as well as it happened to Trump, but now Trump, he has the full power to do basically whatever he wants, especially because he doesn't face any judicial restraint in terms of, the Supreme Court is on his side. So how powerful is the new Donald Trump?
Thanks. Thanks, first of all, for this kind of invitation. So the Supreme Court, for sure, gave President Trump what we can call unprecedented powers given the context in which Trump is operating. The decision of the Supreme Court on presidential immunity is very worrying, I think, from the perspective of the institutional balance in the US. Not only because the Supreme Court basically said that there are acts for which the president has an absolute immunity, but this is not unprecedented, this is not uncommon, but because the Supreme Court said that there are powers for which the president enjoys what the court called a limited presumptive immunity, which is not absolute, but yet is up to the courts to prove that he cannot use that immunity. So basically, this ended all the proceedings that were started against Trump. But this is only one portion of a broader issue, I think, because the Supreme Court is enforcing, and it actually has been enforcing for now some years, an idea of the executive that we can call, and they call, the unitary executive. So the idea is that all the executive power is in the hand of the president, is firmly in the hand of the president, which means that even the possibility for those agencies and entities within the executive powers to counterbalance partially or to intervene in the definition of policies is being basically removed. And this is not only because of the idea of the unitary executive, but also because fairly recently the Supreme Court removed another important piece of the bigger puzzle, which is the idea that agencies enjoy a form of discretion when interpreting the laws that they are called upon to apply. This is another piece of the puzzle. So it's not only the immunity, but it's the combination of multiple theories and multiple ideas that give this image of the president as a strong, very strong authority within the frame of government, which, as I was saying, is not entirely unprecedented, but given the circumstances, it's a reason to worry, I believe. Also because, as it's been discussed, the Supreme Court now is dominated by the conservatives. The Supreme Court, for those who are not familiar with the institution, is composed of 9 justices. Now, out of these 9, 6 are conservative justices. 3 were nominated by President Trump during his first term. Trump was able to nominate 3 justices in 4 years, which is remarkable. This was not because of any particular ability of Trump or the Republican Party. This was because there were contingencies and historical circumstances that helped these nominations to happen. But this for sure created a context in which the Supreme Court is firmly in the end of the conservative majority. Also because the conservative majority is very consistent. So they tend to align in voting decisions. So actually, this consistency of the conservative majority is something that can be proved. If you look at statistics that tell us how justices vote at the Supreme Court, this consistency is absolutely evident. In the large majority of cases, they tend to vote, they tend to follow the same path. And I think it's important to mention this because the ideological division is something that is clearly impacting precedents. The Supreme Court gave many rulings that were clearly hostile to President Biden in the last 4 years. Many people have discussed, and as you know, this was a big issue in the political campaign, the Dobbs v. Jackson case, which is the decision that overruled Roe v. Wade on the abortion, on the right to have an abortion. But this is one portion of what the Supreme Court did in that respect. I think it's very important to mention the decisions of the Supreme Court that concerned the admission policies of universities and the students' loans. There were 2 objectives of Biden administration, and the Supreme Court ruled in a direction that was clearly against the presidency in either case. So I think that the Supreme Court has proved largely that its ideological orientation has a clear impact and can have a clear impact on the presidency, either in the direction of strengthening the president or in the direction of acting against certain elements of presidential policy. Now, the position of the Supreme Court is for sure has been strengthened by Trump's nominees. Biden was able to nominate only 1 justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson, in 2022. So the balance in the Supreme Court didn't change at all. Now, it's true that I don't think that Trump will be capable of nominating any more justices at the Supreme Court. It's not likely at this moment. I think that this can happen unless something unexpected happens. Justices they serve a life tenure, which means that they can resign or be subjected to a form of impeachment, or they can die. But that's the only option for a president to
Thank you, Graziella.
for.
We are running a little bit late, so I stop you here because you gave us a clear picture. So despite all this situation, which is a very powerful and unchained precedent with a very potentially disruptive agenda in terms of foreign affairs, financial markets reacted very cheerfully to the election of Donald Trump, maybe too cheerfully, with the so-called Trump trade, which is buying or selling stocks with the expectation that Donald Trump will cut corporate taxes and will adopt protectionist measures that we'll discuss later with Thomas Schaum, and so the inflation will rise. So Franco Bruni, how do you assess the reaction of financial markets, and what are the implications in terms of monetary policy on both sides of the Atlantic? This was an election decided mainly by inflation, probably, of the long-term consequences of inflation. And what do you expect in terms of economic fallouts?
Well, thank you. First, let me just make a comment, a general comment on what's going to happen with foreign policy and Trump. To the extent that foreign policy measures do not require extra budget, in the United States, foreign policy decisions are entirely in the hands of the president. So we could therefore be terrified by this, because the guy is, in a way, in power. The Congress would be involved only if he needs more money, which if you start with a good budget, then once this is passed with the full control of both the Chamber and Senate, it's done. So this would be terrified, and the worst possible things could happen, given if Trump goes with an ideological mood to interfere with affairs in the world. However, foreign policy implementation is different from domestic policy implementation. It's much more complex. And in a way, it's less controllable. It needs a lot of people to be specific people, highly sophisticated people to be implemented. So the problem is, what is going to happen to the arms of foreign policy? Because the guy in Washington can choose tremendous strategies, but then he needs people to implement it. And it's different from domestic. I mean, in domestic cases, he has, in a way, he has less power, but much more easy implementation, but easier. And all its domestic supporters can help him to realize this in business, in taxes, etc. But in foreign policy, you need the Pentagon, you need the CIA, you need the diplomacy. And the previous Trump has, I remember, he was able to sort of destroy the Department of Treasury. But this basically became an impediment to really make the diplomatic work that would have been required to go further. And so I really think that we are going to see a much more pragmatic type of foreign policy, perhaps extremely disordered, extremely extravagant in some ways, but probably not that effective. So I would fear more the disorder and the disorientation of the world, and then I fear the specific decisions. Take an example. I mean, Ukraine. Okay, suppose that the decision is, okay, Putin will win, and we close it down, we give away part of Ukraine, and that's it. But still, you have to sit at the table and write down a treaty or something. And this needs a lot of, because the rest of the world is not just there looking at you. I mean, you have expert diplomats, expert military people from all over the world. So if you don't have the right persons, and to get the collaboration of the right persons, Mr. Trump will have to be sort of moderate inside, because otherwise these persons will not collaborate. So I'm not what I really fear is that we're going to keep having seminars like this, very interesting, but where we'll keep saying, well, what's going to happen? I come to your question on monetary issues. I mean, okay, the Fed has been acquiring a lot of credibility during the last couple of years by fighting inflation in a very decisive way, and they had lost a lot of credibility before, and they have reconstructed it. So I think that they will not risk losing it soon. Powell and his group are going to stay in power until 2026. So for the next couple of years, I think that monetary policy will stay what it should, what it would have been without Trump. We can criticize it. We can say interest rates should go down faster or quicker, but I don't think that the president will really. He will speak. Perhaps he will say some crazy things at the wrong moment, but and this will maybe create disorder on the markets. But at the end, the Fed will not be influenced in a substantial way. This means that also the European Central Bank and European monetary policy should sort of think in an independent way, because on the other side of the Atlantic and on the dollar side, policy will be what we expect it to be. The exchange rate, and you can see that now the exchange rate was very much up yesterday, and the dollar exchange rate, and very much down today. So they don't. I think that the effect at the end will be not very relevant. No big shocks to interest rates if there are no other difference. I think that the nice thing would be if both the Fed and the ECB could profit from this period, a couple of years, to coordinate in order to design a strategy for the long term that reassures global markets on the regularity and the stability of the monetary system all over the world. We cannot allow ourselves to have interest rates and exchange rates going, all over the place just because there is Trump, there is the war, there is the China, so they have to. And if the Fed and the ECB work in this direction, and if they reach an accord, then we can really be sure that monetary stability will be resilient and robust against shocks. And I hope they will do it. They will prepare a strategy for normal times that we don't have, because they keep saying that we decide next time according to the information, to the data. Up to now, this has been sort of normal and rational, because things were very, very out of order. But now we are entering the normality with inflation down and interest rate normal. And at this point, we need to know how they will behave in normal times. And then they will have to give some guarantees on the long run on, about how they will cope with super shocks like wars, Trumps, etc. Because the way they did it last time with the Lehman crisis and then the Euro crisis and then the COVID and then the wars, etc., has been a bit crazy. I mean, they've chosen, they've made decisions in a very imprudent way, then they've been driven by the decision to keep these exaggerations in liquidity and with interest rates, and they didn't have a strategy. And the strategies must be centered on the idea that monetary policy has its own role, and it cannot and it should not try to do what the other policies are unable to do. We don't want to hear the fact that given that we no longer hear the fact that given that we have COVID, we have the war, we have the gas, we have Trump, we have anything, then the economy has some difficulty to run fast enough. And so here are central bankers that will help the economy to run faster in the long run. This is something that has to be excluded on paper. This is not our task. And by the way, this would help governments to be more responsible and take the decisions that now they don't take because they think, well, after all, if the economy goes down, there are going to be low interest rates, a lot of liquidity, and things in one way or another will be. So I hope that this will happen. And these days I keep writing these ideas, and I hope that sooner or later it's not, obviously it's not my own idea, but I know that this is a tendency that I hope will be followed because it's in the papers also of these central banks. It's in the working papers, and something will happen, I hope, in this sense.
It's not optimism, but it's maybe the closest thing that we can have. So the idea that the system will rearrange to protect itself from interferences. One big question that is also related to monetary policy and to inflation is if Trump will actually do what he has promised to do in terms of tariffs and protectionism. And this is where we go to Thomas Schoenbaum to help us. Yes, Franco want to add? Yes.
Textbook, okay? If the budget is going to be in deficit, if fiscal policies are going to be imprudent, as apparently could be according to the plans of Trump, well, at that point, the current account of the balance of payment will have to be in deficit, mathematically, except in the case where they give up investments, and I don't see the American administration giving up investments more than, or if the saving of Americans goes up a lot. So with a normal behavior of investment and saving, if they spend a lot in terms of public, or if they cut taxes a lot, they will have a deficit which has to correspond to a current account deficit. But if this is the force that comes from fiscal policy to the balance of payment, then what happens with tariffs? The idea of tariffs is to obtain a surplus. So there is clearly a contrast between a protectionist tariff policy and a current and a fiscal policy, an expansionary fiscal policy. they have to take a
You
decision.
are assuming that Donald Trump feels constrained by economic models and rationality, which is probably not the case. But we can ask Thomas Schoeman to answer this question. I mean, what is the ultimate goal of Donald Trump's trade policy project? I mean, I don't know if you read the papers by this think tank called America First Policy Institute, which is supposed to be the Bible of the Trump administration. Basically, they say that they want to destroy what is remaining of the World Trade Organization and that they just want to have tariffs for the sake of it. I mean, there is, I don't know if there is another purpose. So what is the strategy and what do you expect that they could implement of it?
Yes, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and welcome to a new world without international law and without respecting WTO norms. But let me first comment on the election. I believe, as an American, as a student of American history, I think this is the most significant American election since 1860. And from a European perspective, I would say that this election is very much the end of an era, the way the end of the Roman Republic was in 30 BC. And by that, I mean that the United States is going to have a fundamental change in government. I believe that we're on the way to a one-party state, that the Republicans will never leave power, and that elections in most states will be simply advisory. So I'm very, very pessimistic about that, and it'll lead to oligarchy and plutocracy, which is in the works. But first of all, let me answer your question about Donald Trump and his mindset as far as diplomacy and foreign policy is concerned. Well, there are three salient characteristics to Donald Trump. Number one, he is transactional. Now, what do I mean by this? Most rulers, most prime ministers, most presidents, they try to implement policies which in their mind are in the interest of their people, in the interest of their countries. Not Donald Trump. Trump is transactional. For example, NATO. American presidents support NATO for 80 some years since its creation, because it enhances the security of the United States and enhances the security of the world and the Europeans, of course. But Donald Trump looks at it entirely differently. He looks at it in a transactional way. He looks at it in the way, if I support NATO, what are you going to do for me? And he by what are you going to do for me? He means me personally, my interests personally, not necessarily the interests of the United States. Okay, that's one characteristic. The second characteristic, the second salient characteristic of Donald Trump is, if you criticize Donald Trump, and we're used to free markets, we're used to freedom to speak out. We criticize whom we want to criticize. But with Donald Trump, he never forgets a criticism, and he will mark you down as an enemy, and he will pursue retaliation against you, economic retaliation. And he's a man with power, and now the ultimate power, and he will do everything he can to bring you down, to a nullity, to retaliate against you, and I mean economically and politically. The third characteristic of Donald Trump, he is a man who has spent his life in business, family business. He never held an office before being president becoming president in 2017. So he is a business person who runs a family business. He started out with $400 million, so it wasn't that hard. And he declared bankruptcy 5 times. but and so he is used to making decisions unilaterally, autocratically. In a family business, you're a CEO and you wake up and you say, I'm going to do this, and you order it to be done. That is his mindset. He sees no reason why, as president of the United States, he should not simply be an autocrat and wake up in the morning and say, I want to pull out of NATO, get it done. This is his mindset. So I don't believe that he is going to be much moderated in this new term, because he learned a lesson last time. He learned not to surround himself with people who might restrain him. He is going to surround himself with yes people. Now let me turn to briefly, I know we don't have much time, to three aspects of his foreign policy. One is international economics, obviously the tariffs program. Number two, the security position of the United States under Donald Trump. Number three, climate change. I think it's safe to say, returning to the tariffs, I believe he will implement those. He does not need the Congress. He can do that by simple executive order. And I believe that he is going to do that, impose a 10 to 20% tariff across the board. And he is going to at least 60% and probably more with China. So what will this mean? This will mean trade war. And obviously inflation, tariffs are like taxes. He believes, and no one can convince him otherwise, that tariffs, when he imposes a tariff on an import coming into the United States, he believes this is a tax on the exporting country. Incredible. He is a stupid man. He doesn't understand tariffs. He believes that this is a way to raise money in the US Treasury. So this is his mindset. And so the 10 to 20% tariffs are going to be, in his view, they're going to enrich the United States, and they won't have any domestic impact. Obviously, we know that tariffs act like taxes, and the real payers of the tariffs are going to be the American consumers. But he doesn't. I expect inflation and ultimately a recession out of this tariff war. Okay. And with respect to China, the tariffs will be so high, and that he will impose what we call decoupling of trade and probably investment between the United States and China. This will take some months to entail, but this is a radical change. In 2016, China was the United States' greatest trading partner. Now China is going to be decoupled. China trade is going to be decoupled from American trade, and that has a lot of importance for the EU. The EU would be caught in the middle, and so I think that this is going to be the future, and obviously China will retaliate, and it's going to be a very messy economic system, and I think there are going to be very much economic troubles growing out of this system.
Thank you so much. I mean, I think it's quite shaking. As the computer was shaking, we are all shaken a little bit now. But now we have the final and most relevant question to us, because we have to discuss the role of Europe. So Gianluca Passarelli has the tough task to answer. Should we think that Europe will just look at this without any agency to shape the events, or is this the Jean Monnet moment where in the middle of a crisis Europe will find a new voice? I mean, we say Europe, but Europe means nothing. I mean, are we discussing member states? Are we discussing the European Commission with actually the strongest president we have ever had at the helm of the Commission? Or are we discussing the Council? Are we discussing the people? So what is, I mean, your title, the title of your book, The United States of Europe, is like a requiem for that project, or is a hope that now, thanks to Donald Trump, will become real?
Good evening. Thank you for the kind invitation, Stefano Feltri, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you for hosting me at the Bocconi University. I'm glad to be an author of a GEA publisher, and I would thank them for their wonderful job. And I'm glad to share my ideas with such a distinguished share of colleagues and the audience. Stefano probably introduced a high number of expectations to my intervention. So I will certainly, as Max Weber would say, I will certainly deceive your expectations, if any. I would just try to put some arguments. Yeah, I agree that economy is an argument. We will wait for more detailed electoral data in the next couple of months, so I will be a bit skeptical of, even if I'm a political scientist, loving numbers and votes. I will wait some more consolidate data to make any reading of the situation on the flow of votes, etc. But yes, I think that Karl Marx was in that election, or not disturbing Karl Marx. We can go back to Bill Clinton in 1996 when he won the election, and the Bill Clinton slogan was, "It's economy, stupid," because the economy was bad, so he was really working on that. Actually, it was in 1992, sorry. It is the third time in history that there is a comeback. The fact that a president runs twice, winning, losing, and then again back. The first was at the end of the 19th century was Cleveland, then Theodore Roosevelt, and then Donald Trump. So there is something happening. I don't know if it's a Gramscian optimism of the will, but I think that the institutions are well solid, and I'm not that scared of Donald Trump victory, which, you know, from... yeah, I know, probably in Europe, and in this moment, yesterday, the New York Times make me an interview, and they were surprised I was so positive, because, I mean, institutions are being created to have checks and balances. So, also in the 70s, Arthur Schlesinger, that was the counselor of JFK, written this book that was called The Imperial Presidency, because of Richard Nixon's concentration of power. Then we saw how Richard Nixon ended with his term. So I think that there are some vaccine to this concentration of power. The Supreme Court, which is not a good shape in this moment, but they have their own possibility. So there are other international actors that can intervene. I mean, the task that Stefano gave me was about the European leadership, how can be impacted by this election. I think that we cannot focus on one single event, because there is, you know, the consequences are path dependent. So it depends on the history, and there cannot be a revolution on one single event. So I think it is important to analyze in perspective, in a diachronic way, to detect real changes despite the symbolic or apparent ones. So formally, I think that probably nothing changes. because the US and the European Union remain on the same side. That is the guarantors of the post-Cold War order, which is still there, even in there are colleagues that studies international relations, they call us the unsatisfied, that they want to change this international order. Politically, probably Kamala Harris was preferable for most of the European states, but Trump promised, both promised more burden sharing, especially on the NATO side. So in this sense, nothing would change. Because they would have shared the same problems, Kamala Harris, Republicans, Democrats, and the European Union alike. So the problem of reducing the commitments, so the so-called retrenchment, but I would interpret this idea of retrenchment that dates back to Bill Clinton. So it's not just the monster Donald Trump that is affecting this, but it's something that has changed after 1989 of this idea of having a unipolar world. So I think that is the idea of having a national/nationalist US policy and politics that dates back to the beginning of the 20th century. Is idea of freedom from something, be free from the actors that you were mentioning, but also to be free to do something. So I'm free from these organizations, but I'm also free to impose my view. And also to avoid the collapse, because the US should avoid that the political analysis called the overstretching, because they have to deal with Europe, China, Indo-Pacific. And in this scenario, of course, Europe is not the first priority for the US, but not only for Donald Trump. It dates back to also the agenda of the last 4 administration at least. So reducing the cost of the hegemony, again. So disengaging from non-vital areas, and those non-vital areas are Europe, Middle East, and North Africa. So basically the Mediterranean arena. Trump will be very supportive to Israel, but also to Saudi Arabia, probably. Again, the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital, but Biden administration didn't deal with this problem. Looking at the Abraham Accords as a solution, and again targeting Iran as the main sponsor of terrorism. I'm just going by points because the time is running. Yeah, no war with him. So Trump doesn't want to go with this issue. And again, NATO allies, I quote, must gonna pay their bill. Stefano Feltri title to my task was, "Is this the European Union Trump proof?" It's a very clever and provocative title. I don't think so. I don't think so, but this is an opportunity. I don't know, it's a Jean Monnet momentum. I think there are too many Jean Monnet momentum. Yeah, and there is no reliable reaction from the European Union leadership. Because if you watch and if you check the Viktor Orban speech at the European Parliament and the reaction of Ursula von der Leyen, I'm sorry for my liberal friends, but the most political speech was that of Viktor Orban. Viktor Orban clearly said we should include, for example, Serbia in the European Union. And I would have expected Ursula von der Leyen saying, yes, yeah, we agree, we should push this dossier and having Serbia in the European Union to stop the threatening and the blackmail of Russia. But she didn't say that. So I'm much more concerned and worried about the silence of Europe, the silence and the incertitude of Ursula von der Leyen. It looks like she doesn't know how to deal with the European diplomacy and the geopolitical agenda than the provocative and the talkative attitude of Donald Trump. So this is an opportunity, but again, institutions matter, and I'm sure you did listen to the speech of Donald Trump yesterday. In Italian we say un discorso pieno di miele. It was a very sweet speech, very institutional, was perfect. So and the fact that his second term, he wants to go in the history, he wants to avoid to be remembered as bad. I think Trump would have been more dangerous not in the White House. It's a paradox. It's a paradox. But I mean, there are reactions. Democracy is there to react to these risks. So I would be quite optimistic. Also because in the history teaches us that are oaks that make peace and not doves. So the fact that Trump will deal with Netanyahu can be something, at least I hope, that will happen. One second. For Italy, in terms of domestic political preferences, Trump is probably more in line with part of the coalition, but I think there will be some of continuity also because of the historical patterns, but also because of the European general framework. Last thing, the reaction of Europe should be what we would do in the future. Would be the Stati Uniti d'Europa or not? Because the Draghi's report has been basically ignored by Ursula von der Leyen. So President Draghi idea is there on the table. So now, paradoxically, the fact that Trump put this strong negative agenda gives the opportunity to Europe to react and say, we want our own military defense, we want our fiscal, this is your field, fiscal sharing, etc., etc. So this is a big opportunity. I'm a bit more concerned about the ability of this European Commission to deal with these challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Gianluca, for very provocative thoughts. I definitely recommend to all of you to check on our website because we have very interesting policy briefs about many of these issues, especially on defense and trade-related issues. I know we are out of time, but I would ask our friends to give us just a couple of minutes because I don't want to close without any comment from the audience since we have many students. So just 2 brief comments from the audience. 2 super brief comments. And then we try to react. You want to say something? No. If we have no comments from the audience, we can. Okay.
I'm not anymore a student, but I would like to ask briefly some comments.
No, wait a second, Stefano. The mic is coming.
I would like to hear a brief comment on Germany's situation, because asking to the last professor that talked, because I think that this will impact the view that we have of European institutions and the response that European institution will give to, well, what Trump has for us in mind.
Just to be everybody on the same page, basically the German chancellor fired the finance minister, the coalition collapsed, and now we will face months and months without a clear leadership in Germany. Who wants to answer? Gianluca, very short questions, then Franco?
Yeah, I don't go on the coalition aspects, on the economy, etc. But from the defense perspective, military expenditure of Germany doubled that of France. Okay? So either President Macron decide to, and the European leadership, to share two things. The nuclear weapon as a European military tool and the Security Council seat as a European one. So that would be a very important reaction and action from the European perspective towards this great challenge coming from United States and Asia. But again, we need leadership in both at these two countries at least to deal with this situation. Otherwise, we will be dealing with, challenges going up and down depending on the economy, on the climate change, et cetera, et cetera. So it is important to build up our institutional, economic, and military infrastructures.
Franco, final word. Are you worried?
Yes, very much. Well, after all, Germany's weaknesses are terrible, and France's weaknesses are terrible. And they both have their roots. I mean, the weaknesses have their roots. Normally, weaknesses have no roots, but these weaknesses have roots in the structure and in the history of these two countries. And I don't see an easy way out, which means that Europe will be divided and will be most probably unable to react in a positive way to the Trump shock. And this is a pity because the rest of the world, on the contrary, China and the global south, will react probably by integrating more, by having strategies and by reacting in a constructive way, perhaps in a peaceful way or an aggressive way, but in a concrete and well-designed way, which is not what Europe will be able to do. And this is going to be really the weakness of our... It's a pity because we could do a lot of things if we could really profit from the Trump danger to get together faster. Look at what we could do on financial markets, like unification of our financial markets. Look what we could do on international organizations. There are possibilities to involve the South, the global South, in the management of the IMF, in the management of the United Nations, and Europe could be the broker for this. And Trump would find somebody in the world which is able to, broker ideas and strategies dealing with India, with Brazil, with the Arabs, etc., independently of his diplomacy, independently of... Europe has this possibility. I mean, there's absolutely. But the problem is that you have, Monsieur Macron and Monsieur Scholz, and they will, and then Madame Meloni, what they will do, they will try to go to Washington and be cheerful with Trump and ask for Trump support to their parties and to the internal struggle. And this will make the weakness of Europe, and it's going to be a disaster. But here I'm pessimist. Yeah?
Since there is a glimmer of hope, or at least a window of opportunity, as you said, I mean, there will be good work to do for us with the YEP, with ISPI and everybody. I thank you all the speakers. I thank you all for joining us. And if you are interested in continuing this discussion, we have the last one of this series, geopolitical debate on December 5 to unpack the COP29 outcome. So we will discuss climate and the Trump effect on climate. Thank you all.